The Carleton College Convocation program is a weekly lecture series that brings fresh insights and perspectives from experts in a variety of fields. The program has a rich history dating back several decades. The selected Convocation speakers assist the liberal arts mission of centering thoughtful conversations within education and beyond.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Scatliff O'Grady from the class of 1985 and a 2023 parent. I am the founder of Acting in the Community Together, the precursor of the TRIP CE. Woo! The sponsor of this convocation. Today, many of us have returned to campus to celebrate 40 years of campus community involvement. I want to thank Carleton, I really want to thank Cinda Nichols, who literally for the past 4 years we've been scheming and dreaming this up. So thank you for welcoming all of us back, and for all of us who are able from TRIPC ACT, please stand up. Woo. Just want to make a few comments about the work, and then I'll introduce our speaker today. I spent my first year out of college as a Carleton Green Dean. And for those of you who don't know, there are Green Deans in the room. We were people who were fresh out of graduation day, and we came to build community involvement on campus. We had the charge of building student leadership and opportunities for ACT. At first, I did not really know what I was doing. When I went to the senior center in Northfield to share all of our plans over coffee and donuts, one by one, I watched many of the seniors stand up and walk out. I learned that day, if you want to bring about change, you must listen first. At Carleton, and as a national leader of this movement in higher education, I am often asked whether activism or direct service brings about the greatest change. I just like this question because it has always been and will always be both. Okay, 40 years later, I serve on the faculty at North Carolina Central University and HBCU in Durham, North Carolina. The financial burdens are real. Our campus food pantry is busier than ever. At a church nearby where I volunteer, 50 cars typically pull up for a box of food. Last week, 75 cars showed up. While we are here to celebrate an anniversary, our work will carry on. That's why we invited Fred de Sam Lazaro. He is the director of the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas, a program that combines international journalism and teaching. He has served with the PBS NewsHour since 1985, reporting from 70 countries. Truly, he lives by the principle that storytelling makes the foreign less foreign. To tell a story, you must get close. For all of us who have built our lives around this principle, we are honored to share this day with you, Fred.
Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you for coming today. I won't be insulted if you get up and leave whenever you are moved to do it, and I got a keen understanding of how to gauge this. I just got back from England and doing a similar talk in a small retreat center in Northumberland, and there's a debate ongoing in a parochial and a Catholic school there about the appropriate length of girls' dresses. And a proposed rule that was very controversial about how long and whether to mandate a certain length for the dresses that girls wear to the school. And back and forth the debate went in this until who should weigh in but a nonagenarian priest named Father Mark. And he said, a skirt should be like a good sermon. It should be long enough to cover the essentials, but short enough to be interesting. So that's what I'm going to do today, is to try and gauge the body language in the house. I am so honored to be in this campus, which I have only come for journalism purposes to interview people. And it is a storied institution. The Convocation's portal says that the crowd size says this of crowd size. It says numbers increase when there is a renowned speaker or a controversial topic. So I'm not sure what to make of this group, but on a beautiful day like today, I do appreciate that you are here. I have no idea how to gauge it, but it reminds me of something that a good friend of mine who hosts a cable TV show in the Twin Cities is fond of saying, which is that not a lot of people know that I am famous. I want to talk today a little bit about how we're trying at the Undertold Stories Project to use humane, strong character-driven storytelling to educate our audience. Beyond broadcast television and online PBS, to students in particular, about some of the most pressing issues of our time, from climate change to global health. And this is a screen grab from our website, undertoldstories.org, and we've got scores of short documentaries that are streamed online, each under each of these broader topics. Documentaries that also have class notes in them to allow professors to have some study guidance. We want to be able to add to the solid foundation that you students get in institutions like this to make storytelling help your education become more three-dimensional in its field, to help you pursue the whole truth, to get the context, and to engage with some of these pressing issues of our time. This is a quote that's attributed to Mark Twain, who said, "I have never let school interfere with my education." And I'm Exhibit A. I'm not here because of scholarly work. I'm here because of shoe leather journalism, curiosity, basically, that has led to a storytelling career. The media landscape, I needn't tell you, I've been doing this since 1985. Don't feel bad about graduating in 1985, Julia. The media landscape has shifted radically since I began my career, and we're in an age when no matter what we pursue as a career, we're all called upon to bring out our inner journalist. One way in which I like to frame our task in the journalism context is to make the foreign less foreign. Back in the 80s, when Ted Turner founded CNN, he banned the use of the word foreign by his reporters. The idea is the more foreign an issue is, or that a people feel to us, the less relevant they will seem in our lives. And that's inaccurate. So how do we do this in a time of unprecedented upheaval all over the world, when trust in our institutions has eroded so markedly? How can we shut out the noise to understand fact from fiction? To understand propaganda from real journalism, all made that much more difficult in an age of so much disruptive technology and artificial intelligence. And how can we use that same technology to better inform ourselves and to use storytelling, whether we are the teller or the told? whether the audience is in the millions on X or on TikTok, or whether the neighborhood signal group. And we happen to have a great example of this from what happened during Metro Surge, the immigration enforcement action that happened in Minnesota earlier this year. I've lived in the Twin Cities for most of my, well, not quite most of my adult life, but at least 4 decades now, but mostly worked overseas. And it's, as we say in Minnesota, different to be doing a global story from your backyard. And yet that's what we did pretty much wall to wall in January. And I'm going to start out by showing you a tiny glimpse of some of our early reporting in January. It's a tiny excerpt of our story.
At the Park Avenue Church, just steps from where Good was shot, the tension is palpable.
We gather today with heavy hearts.
Jennifer Ikomamuchko is a pastor at the more than 100-year-old church. Her grandmother was one of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans interned during World War II.
My legacy is to call people of all different backgrounds to fight now for who are the marginalized, who is being targeted right now.
Just as I asked Ikomamuchko about what comes next, we were interrupted by the sounds of car horns and whistles outside. Agents were raiding a house across the street from the church, and a crowd had gathered. When officers emerged with 2 handcuffed young men, tempers flared. Agents fought with observers. They deployed pepper spray, tear gas, and flashbangs as Ikomamuchko watched nearby. At one point, a woman tried to drive past the scene. Authorities smashed her window, dragged her from the car, and detained her. She shouted that she was on her way to a doctor's appointment. The episode lasted more than 45 minutes. PBS News' Liz Landers asked White House border czar Tom Homan about the incident.
There are Americans who see this and say this looks like Putin's Russia. What is your response to that?
You know, if they let us in their damn jail and stop being a sanctuary city, we could arrest the bad guy in the safety and security of the jail. But because they normally release them, now we got to go in the community and find them. Then they're mad we're in the community.
Were you surprised at what unfolded right outside your church?
It was a battle scene. I had this moment where I didn't bring my cell phone, and I just lifted up what I had, and I lifted up my hand. And I looked over and I saw a neighbor I didn't know lifting up the middle finger. There was protesting, there's observing, and there was prayer, and all is going to be needed.
That's just an excerpt from about a 7 or 8 minute story. I don't think we've ever seen a mobilization quite like what we saw in the Twin Cities in America. Rising organically for the most part. There was no real leadership in the classic sense. People using social media, ordinary people bringing out their inner journalist and their cell phones. I went to this rally in downtown Minneapolis where crowd estimates went as high as 50,000, and the temperature went as low as 20 degrees below zero ambient temperature. So that tells you something. They saw people who resembled roofers and restaurant workers, farm laborers, personal care attendants who simply did not fit the criminal stereotype. They saw a militarized surge that seemed out of proportion to the task at hand, a militarized enforcement that seemed so out of place on American soil. And suddenly people who were seen as called criminal illegal aliens became simply neighbors who needed care packages because they went into hiding, whose children needed to be shuttled back and forth to school. There were residents of a senior housing project that I know who were doing laundry for people in hiding because they couldn't get out to the laundromat. Something that just almost spontaneously came up. Now at the same time, there's a substantial part of America, of Minnesota as well. This is in the north of War Road, Minnesota. That's all a very different reality. They saw people interfering with and impeding legitimate police activity in an enforcement action that, no question, Donald Trump promised before we voted in 2024. I think it's a testament to the media ecosystem in which we now live. A filmmaker friend of mine, Karen Murtaz, puts it this way about how we've moved to consume media. And it's gone from, I'll believe it when I see it, to I'll see it when I believe it. Think about that. So where does this leave us? How do we get a conversation going in the public square about immigration? I think there's no question that the majority of Americans want a reformed immigration system, want secure borders, want a consideration of our international obligations on refugee matters, for example, and consideration of the needs of our economy, whether it's in technology, whether it's in healthcare or agriculture, where immigrants are frankly indispensable today. It's way above my pay grade to opine on what might drive a consensus toward immigration reform, but for our part, we look for stories about the day-to-day reality of how immigration actually plays out on Main Street, away from the rancorous chattering that you hear on various forms of media. And I want to share this story from a few years ago from America's Dairyland, not far from where we are here, and show you one glimpse of how immigration plays out on Main Street on a dairy farm.
A unique program started in Wisconsin helps to build bridges between farm employers and migrant employees. Special correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro begins our report in the Mexican state of Veracruz. It's part of Fred's series, Agents for Change.
They are hard to distinguish from thousands of Americans who meet up in Mexico, headed to its beach resorts and a respite from winter.
You're looking good.
But this group of Wisconsin dairy farmers had a very different destination as they headed inland and up steep gravel mountain roads. The views are breathtaking, but these are places where tourists rarely go and where locals say it's hard to stay and earn a living. It's become an annual ritual for the Midwesterners, getting together with families their Mexican employees left behind as they traveled north to find work. Their earnings sustain the families here in Mexico, even if the breadwinners themselves, most of them undocumented in the U.S., could not afford the cost or risk of a quick visit home. John Rosenau was on his 9th trip in recent years, visiting the families of his 10 Mexican workers. First stop, the parents of Marco Rosales.
Is there anything you want us to tell Marco?
Tell him that we are well and tell him to behave.
Does he mostly behave? Marco behaves. Marco at times works 12 hours a day, and right now he's working with 10 below.
On a frigid early January morning, I got to see Marco's routine, which begins at the crack of dawn in the milking parlor.
We run this 24 hours a day in here.
How many gallons of milk come out of this place?
Like today, we'll ship probably 5,000 gallons.
Families like Rosenau's, he's 5th generation on this farm, helped give Wisconsin the bragging rights as America's dairyland. But the unrelenting routine of milking, birthing, feeding, and cleaning is one Rosenau says Americans long ago stopped wanting to do. For years, Rosenau says he's tried to recruit for jobs that pay between $32,000 and $42,000 a year, plus on-farm housing if needed.
I've gone to farm supply stores locally asking people that work there. I never got a response, ever.
And you would pay more than these big department stores?
Yes. And so I don't understand why Americans don't do it, but they don't.
About 20 years ago, left with no choice, he says, he hired a Mexican immigrant he found through a farm magazine ad.
Came and milked 54 days straight. Here was somebody that worked as hard as I do. Wow, this is the answer to my biggest problem that I had was labor.
Migrant workers may have solved the labor problem for some farmers here, but also revealed a new one.
Pull it up to the top.
Communication. So a county extension agent asked Sean Duvall, the local high school Spanish teacher, to start language classes.
I thought, well, they're not going to learn enough Spanish, or they're not going to learn about the culture or why people do what they do in a 20-hour Spanish class. So I thought, well, let's do something more.
She and Rosenau founded a nonprofit called Puentes Bridges, intended to offer language immersion trips to Mexico, Spanish lessons for the dairy owners, English for their workers, as well as a dairy technician training program, trying to help two very different cultures better understand each other.
It's politically a conservative area, but all of a sudden there's this presence of people who don't share your culture, and they needed somebody who knew something. And I didn't know that much, but I knew more than they did.
Today, Wisconsin's dairy industry says a majority of workers are immigrants, an arrangement that endures despite the rancorous debate around immigration. For their part, the immigrants keep a low profile. Roberto Tecpile, who's 39, agreed to share his story. In the 20 years he's been in the U.S., he's returned home just 4 times. He says returning to the U.S. is treacherous and expensive.
I walked 2 days and 2 nights.
Did you have to pay people to get here?
Yes.
The trafficker's fee was $10,000. 32-year-old Armando Tecpile, who's not related to Roberto, endured the same expensive ordeal, driven, he says, by dreams of earning enough to build a comfortable home in his village.
My house, I thank God, it's already 3 floors and complete concrete. It's not finished yet, still in construction, but all the outside is done.
Back in Mexico, Armando's home was the next stop for his boss.
I'm really grateful Armando found you as a place to work, because it's hard to find a good job.
Here and everywhere they visited, the Wisconsin visitors found expressions of appreciation and warm hospitality. But just beneath the smiles, in many cases, lurked the pain of long separation for the host families. After her guests left, Armando's wife, Lourdes Ramos, told me she'd pleaded with her husband not to go to the U.S., to stay home with their sons, now 10 and 5.
I said, I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not asking you for money. We don't need such a big house if it's just 2 of us and the 2 boys, and really, it's nicer to have a smaller place.
She fears they'll wind up like Roberto's family, who've endured his absence over much of the past 2 decades. Rosenau talked with Roberto's father about the new prosperity visible across villages here in new construction and in small enterprises many families have started. But his wife and mother reflected on the price they've paid, particularly the children. Aaron is their middle child.
I miss my papa. I love him a lot.
When was the last time you saw your papa?
I was 5 years old. He used to carry me, and we used to go to see my grandma far away.
His younger sister, Megan, was barely a month old when her father left.
We miss him. We really do miss him.
But it is Roberto and Veronica's 15-year-old son, who was away when we visited, who most worries his mother.
He just wants to go and work with his dad and is waiting to be able to do that. I'm not going to let my son go because the border is very dangerous.
Whether she'll prevail against the strong tug of economic opportunity up north is a big question. A generation ago, her mother-in-law remembers pleading similarly with Roberto and his brothers. All 4 of them remain in the United States. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred de Sam Lazaro in Zongalica, Mexico.
What a wonderful report. Fred's reporting is a partnership.
Thank you, Judy. One of the things that you learn from issues like immigration, or most issues, is that policy is invariably discussed as it applies to faceless masses. The crowds we saw at the southern border that seemed so out of control. Images that likely got President Trump elected in 2024. But the moment you deal with people, Mario, Roberto, their families, their aspirations, your perspective shifts. In other words, there's a human connection. And that is key to effective storytelling in my line of work. We look for strong, relatable characters who accurately reflect the broader story. In this work, we spend a lot of time. I have a producer, Simeon Lancaster, who does a lot of work just looking for people who check all the boxes that will help us tell the larger story. And I'll share just one example from scores that I could share with you of how a human connection is made. This is the mostly cleared rubble by now from the collapse of a multi-story building that housed several garment factories in Bangladesh. It collapsed, it killed just a little more than 1,100 workers, and brought some attention to the dangerous working conditions in the global fast fashion industry, which employs some 4 million workers in Bangladesh, most of them young women. Most of us, I suspect, know little about the faceless, distant workforce of the fast fashion industry, what conditions are like in this factory until a catastrophic event like this, or as long as that media arc endures. We covered this story by following the story of this young woman, Josna Akhtar, who survived 72 hours under the rubble before being rescued. And in our first report, she was in a hospital awaiting spinal surgery. We followed up a year later, and she was still in severe pain, unable to work, unable to provide for the family that she supported, which is her parents and 2 younger siblings. And somehow through this 30-minute, very sad interview, I asked an almost random question, because she's probably a young woman the age of our daughters at the time. And I said, "Did you ever do anything for fun when you worked in this factory?" There was a small pause, and she perked up and she told me how she would wonder, sitting at that machine, about the world outside, where the jeans she was sewing went. So she began putting her phone number on little slips of paper and sliding these into the pockets of the jeans. And they said, "If you like these jeans, call me." And she got a few calls, but no way to converse with these people because of a language barrier. But here was a person who was no longer an anonymous garment worker, but just a regular teenager that anybody can relate to. She became less foreign. A few years later, I happened to run into a man named Andy Lauer, an entrepreneur, an impact investor, and somehow this story came up. He said, "You did that story?" He'd watched it and remembered Josna, not the reporter. Remember, not a lot of people know that I'm famous. But he remembered this. He was so moved that he opened a fair wage factory and started a line of clothing called Visible. Unfortunately, the business did not survive the pandemic, but it went for a few years. Not all of our stories have happily ever after endings. But the point is that this fleeting, humane moment can move people to engage, whether by volunteering, embarking on a career or vocational path, or just simply to be more thoroughly informed. That's what storytelling aims to do, or should aim to do. I think all of us from our earliest formative years of career set out to make the world better, based on the truth that we've come to believe. And speaking about the truth, as a nonfiction storyteller or journalist, one must be open to the idea that the truth is a moving target. That's why we pursue it. When I hear oaths being taken to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, I sometimes am tempted to say, why don't you put an asterisk on that says, "To the best of my knowledge today." I'll give you an example. I recently did some reporting. In fact, we had a series on, for the last 2 days on the NewsHour, about the ricochets from the abrupt dismantling of USAID, the largest humanitarian funder in the world, until it was folded in spectacular fashion soon after the Trump administration took over in 2025. You saw clinical trials that were suspended, supply chains that were severed for life-saving drugs, and there are fears that the consequences will lead to thousands of deaths. This is a sign outside of a TB hospital in Bangladesh that was largely funded by USAID. And yet, just a year earlier, during the Biden administration, we did a 3-part series about what became known as the aid industrial complex, where a sizable proportion of the $60 billion of USAID monies, or US aid monies, was most of it not leaving Washington, D.C. It went to private implementing contractors who, by the time they'd covered their overhead costs and salaries, had little left to actually be spent in the target countries. Now, both these narratives are true. USAID's impact was both enormous and distorted. And more than anything else, the dueling stories demonstrate how complicated most of these issues and these stories are. Few things in the world are black and white, much as we'd love them to be, and much as politicians talk about facile solutions to very complex problems that took centuries to get us where we are. And a public, in this case, that is frequently tuned out does not help. This is a slide from the Council on Foreign Relations, the pie chart on the left showing that a majority of Americans believe that on average a quarter of the federal budget goes to foreign aid. The reality is on the right. It is far less than that. It's less than 1%. At the time of this survey, which was 2019, it's much lower than that even now. Now, it's still a lot of money. You tend to get lost among the zeros. And most people just aren't that tuned into an issue that seems irrelevant to their lives, that feels like a waste of money. Sentiments that many political leaders are only too happy to stoke. And the fact that it is called foreign aid does not help. Here's a quote from Czechoslovakia's last president that I think should be an admonition to all of us. Keep the company of people who seek the truth. Run from those who have found it. So back to storytelling. Finally, as I suggested earlier, in a world where we will see it when we believe it, you have to have more than the facts to share for your efforts to yield any fruit. You need strong characters to drive the narratives. We use change makers who've used innovation and political savvy, even humor, to move the needle on some of these pressing problems. In this montage of images, you'll see people like a man who's cleaned up pollution from China's factories, a surgeon in India who runs a 30,000 bed chain of heart hospitals, the late Paul Farmer, who pioneered the idea of equity in global health care, bringing it to some of the world's most distressed places. Brownie points if you can name or recognize 3 people from this montage. Anybody? Don't feel bad. Not a lot of people know that these people are famous. Well, one of them, the upper right-hand corner, Kailash Satyarthi, who's an anti-trafficking activist in India, is a Nobel Peace Laureate. We did his story the year before, so I take full credit for that. But there are a lot of people like these who are engaged with issues, who are moving the needle ever so slowly, and you need these narratives of hope to propel forward in tackling these very complex issues. I want to share finally a report we did about a man who never let school interfere with his education. Who would have thought that we could do a story about a man's involvement in the issue of menstrual hygiene? Who would have thought that we could do a story about menstrual hygiene for broadcast on a dinnertime television program? This is a critical issue. And as you will see, this man allowed us to tell it.
But first, an unlikely innovation from an unusual innovator. Special correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro has the story of one man who has made it his mission to bring affordable hygiene products to women in India. It's part of our series, Agents for Change.
Arunachalam Muruganantham says he was a born tinkerer, obsessed with figuring out how things worked, from toys to bicycles. He grew up in poverty after his father died young, dropped out of school and became a welder, a lower middle-class occupation in India.
To support my mother, I stopped my schooling.
But his natural curiosity apparently knew no bounds. Years later, it took him into a strictly taboo area in India's tradition-bound society, menstrual hygiene.
We are able to break the taboo and using it.
He's become known as India's pad man. Your goal is to have every woman in this country use sanitary pads if they need it.
Yeah, it's a movement.
A movement begun by a man who knew almost nothing about the female body until after he was married. You did not even know about menstruation at all. You had no idea what it was. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know when it is happening, how it is happening, even where it is happening. I don't know.
And he says his wife Shanti wasn't particularly interested in discussing it.
It's the greatest taboo. Wife never talked to husband, daughter never talked to mother.
That comes at a high cost in public health. Some experts say millions of girls across the developing world miss school during their periods and remain susceptible to infection throughout adulthood. Sanitary pads are widely advertised in India, but surveys suggest only about 1 in 10 women actually uses them. At first, Muruganantham suggested them to his wife.
I asked simply, there is some products in the market, why you are not using that? She instantly told, I also know about that, but we have to cut our family milk budget.
Milk budget?
Yeah, then I find it's a matter of affordability.
He could afford one package of sanitary pads and gave it to Shanti as a gift, partly to find out how they were made and why they had to be so expensive.
The white substance inside uses cotton. The raw material cost of the cotton is few pennies, but I bought the product for dollars. Then even being illiterate, I thought, why not try to make an affordable pad for my wife?
Over the next few years, he tried using local cotton to replicate the commercial pads. His wife suffered through early prototypes that didn't work and went back to using a rag. Muruganantham then coaxed some female medical students to try his subsequent models, figuring the future doctors would be less shy. And he even began wearing a pad himself, creating an artificial uterus and rubber bladder, coaxing a local butcher to provide the raw material, and testing it out while he rode a bicycle.
I filled goat blood, animal blood in it. I tied on my hip. There is a tube connection to the napkin and the bladder.
Shanti had had enough.
Everyone in the village was saying he had gone off his head. I was truly afraid. People said he had become like a vampire, that he was doing crazy things.
She asked me I want to go to my parents' home for a few days. She never come back. On third month, I got a divorce notice from my wife.
She filed for divorce?
Yeah, I got a divorce notice.
His mother, who lived in the home, also left him, but his curiosity did not leave him. He called an American supplier posing as an industrialist in his hometown of Coimbatore, looking to branch out into feminine hygiene products.
Then I claimed myself, I am a mill owner in Coimbatore. Please send some sample.
The samples arrived, and one day when he wasn't home, his dog tore into them.
He took the courier cover, scratches it. Oh my God, I saw a secret. The fiber. You can see the fiber.
So the dog opened this for you?
Opened it, the scratches with the angle.
It was cellulose, he discovered, that when scratched vigorously becomes sponge-like and highly absorbent. It took 2 years to perfect a machine to fluff up the cellulose, he said, a modified food blender in which the blades have to be angled just so.
It's got a prestigious award from Indian Institute of Technology as the best innovation.
It's simple, easily replicated, and can be modified to work without electricity, he says. The pads can be made and sold for a fraction of the commercial varieties. This is the model for how Muruganantham would like to see his product distributed. Thousands of small factories run by groups of women producing these sanitary pads at very low cost and selling them directly to women. Women are far more comfortable buying the pads from women directly, rather than from a store, Muruganathan says. Feminine hygiene is not discussed in open company. Our own questions elicited nervous laughter from the very women making them, even as they praised their product.
There's definitely benefit. Before we were using only cloth and it was very difficult. Now girls don't have that difficulty. It is much easier for them than it was for us.
Muruganathan is determined to change this.
I want to make this as a low-cost sanitary pad movement across the globe.
Helped by awards and his own advocacy, more than 4,000 small factories have started making his sanitary pads across India, each with its own local branding and language.
Malar is meaning of flower.
He gets no royalties from any of this. His workshop does sell the machines, enough to earn him a modest living. But nothing is patented. He wants others to copy or even improve the machine and methods.
The world is shortage of solution providers. Everybody, they want to be in the Forbes list. Under 200.
Everybody wants to be in the Forbes list.
Forbes list. Nobody wants to be a solution provider.
In the end, Shanti decided her husband was a solution provider. She returned after a 5-year separation. Somewhat sheepishly, she admits.
They had his interview on TV that he had discovered sanitary napkins. So I called him and then I came back. He was angry. I told him I did not want to get in his way. That's why I stepped aside. Now we are happy.
Happy for what her husband's work may mean for young girls like their 8-year-old daughter, Preeti Shri.
The strongest creature created by God in this world, not the tiger, not the elephant, not the lion, the women.
If any man doubts this, he says, see how long you can endure a sanitary pad in your daily routine. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred de Sam Lazaro in Coimbatore, India.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
So there you have it. We spend a lot of time trying to find people like him. And again, hearkening back to what I discussed earlier, there are all manner of follow-ups that cry out to be done. You know, how are these offshoots functioning right now? What are the perils and pitfalls of growing it? Is there an environmental issue with disposables? There is a lot in this space of innovation that is coming up with reusable cloth-based as opposed to the disposable kind. I mean, you could go on in pursuit of the whole truth. But to just put this on the radar screen, this is one of the bigger thrills for someone in my line of work. I want to end with a couple of thoughts. Here's Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whom I had the privilege of interviewing a few years ago amid a lot of turmoil in South Africa, a nation that he worked so hard to free from apartheid. He'd been very critical of the government at the time. And I asked him if he was optimistic about the future of South Africa, and he said, I am not an optimist, I am a prisoner of hope. I want to urge you to check out the PBS NewsHour, still committed to honest journalism and storytelling. It's where all of our work goes. All of our coverage, all of the stories are available on our website, along with study questions, targeting faculty wherever we can. And of course, we want to be liked. And I think I will stop here and we'll go to a few questions and or comments. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very, very much, Fred. That was outstanding. And want to thank Julia as well for the introduction. We will move on to the Q&A. Just a quick word about lunch. If you haven't RSVP'd or spoken to me, we are full up today. That being said, there's been a couple cancellations, so if 1 or 2 people want to stampede forward and talk to me, we might be able to squeeze a couple more people in. If you are coming to lunch, we're in Great Hall today, not AGH, Great Hall. And now we'll move on to the Q&A. And that includes our friends on Zoom as well. My friend Jana can send me your questions. So if you're on Zoom and have a question or a comment for Fred, please do. But who would like to start us off?
Hi, I'm wondering in your business, as I watched you covering the surge, Metro Surge, do you have any advice for people around the state took a lot of video of the atrocities that were happening during that time and photos? And if you have any advice for making sure those videos and photos are secure into the future so that history can be recorded.
You're talking about videos that are on people's devices themselves. Yeah, I don't know what one does with them. After a certain amount of time, and I've lived long enough to be at that point, the Minnesota History Center becomes interested in collecting them for those purposes. But for forensic purposes, I think, for example, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and the AG's office have been soliciting things that might help them pursue whatever they're pursuing. I'm obviously not an advocate, but I don't know beyond that whether there's a repository that will serve a broader purpose, and maybe that will evolve with time. I don't know, it's not my expertise, but I suspect that given how historic this event was, that we will find uses for it that we can't fathom right now, to aggregate, classify, and preserve these for whatever purposes in the future beyond just plain historical record. Yes.
Hello. I was very inspired by the stories that you told and that you showed us, and I was wondering whether when do you think someone's story becomes important to tell? Let's say that, because I just noticed that a lot of these stories have elements of connecting with other groups of people, or at least there's some sort of wanting to be heard, with the case of the little girl. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, when does a story become important to tell?
When does a story become important to tell? I think we've all got stories to share that enlighten each other on so many aspects of life in general, and I'm on my way into the twilight zone. I'm already in the twilight zone, but I won't be around for very long. But the media are morphing into something many of us don't even know what it will become. But it is incredibly important that all of us understand media, understand what's being shared with us. I'm just reading a book by Maria Ressa called How to Stand Up to a Dictator, about the experiences that she went through in the Philippines in the 2010s. And it's just a brilliant, brilliant book that also highlights her courageous work in just purveying the truths as journalists saw them in the Philippines, won her a Nobel Peace Prize. And I think she brings to light the enormous power of platforms. In her case, in the 2010s, it was Facebook, and how just volume and chatter are profitable. What one does about it is, again, beyond my pay grade, but what we try to do is to instill a sense of media literacy. How are we going to be able to tell when something is AI generated? Or should that be our first response, is to corroborate and care? And I'm not answering your question directly, but I think all of us, if we have something that we want to share, will find an audience, whether it's in your local signal group, which is what happened all across the Twin Cities, for example, whether it's with your neighbors or your cohorts and other students, or if it's a broader audience on TikTok, or whether it's a legacy media audience, wherever the legacy media are now going. we're all going to be called to be media savvy enough and share when we have something interesting to share that will further the cause of better understanding.
I'm going to jump in with one from Zoom, if I may. And this is, well, you'll find out in a second. It says, hey, Frances O'Grady, class of 23 here, Julia's daughter, watching from Durham, North Carolina. What do you believe compels people, especially young people, to mobilize for social change and become committed to its realization? Do you feel hopeful for the future?
We've had all manner of convocation speakers that question should have been targeted at instead of me. Do I feel hopeful? Yes, I feel hopeful. Generally, one has to have hope to move forward. And I think what compels not just young people, but every one of us to engage is a sense that we are having an impact, and that's what we really want to do. And I'm the least of us here, no false modesty. As I was sharing with Julia at breakfast this morning, she said, well, you've done so much covering this metro surge. And I said, I was probably the only person, along with other media people, in these crowds who was paid to be there. It's a big difference. And so I think what moves us forward at any age is to try and better the world as we see it. And there is no more fertile time of life than being on a campus as a student in a place like Carleton and engaging. And this is a place where people's imaginations are massaged by great scholars. And God knows, there's a lot of energy that tends to wane over the years, but it never goes away. And I think, we're all hardwired, as Archbishop Tutu said, we're all hardwired to do good. Question, comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. Dan Trajano, class of '89. Powerful stories, and I'm wondering how you talk about truth, right? And these are not AI, but they are edited. And how do you wrestle with what is true as you pick which stories and you edit how they come out, and try to get at least what we think is representing truth? Because people pick different stories to present, and whichever side you're on, you're like you say, I'll see it when I believe it. I'll choose the stories that I want to see. But what is sort of the truth to it?
What you see is a sausage that has a very, very complicated recipe. It takes some of the most silly energy in the production of these stories, and an elaborate distillate to get it down to the 7 minutes that these pieces typically are in length. We've talked to dozens of people, at least scores of people, to try and find out who would most accurately represent a cast of characters on an issue. Sometimes it gets lopsided. When we're talking immigration, for example, we could never get a chance to sit down with the DHS spokesperson, the Department of Homeland Security, to get the government side of this story in Minneapolis. We would routinely write to them on email and get a statement. Occasionally there's a press conference where you can throw a question out at Tom Holman, as you saw in that video. But it's, we spend an awful lot of time looking to get a composite truth in everything that we do. Every script that I have, is heavily annotated. There's nothing in any sentence that I write that doesn't have two sources to corroborate facts. That's a commitment to the truth. I don't know if I'm addressing your question necessarily, but it's very complicated to put these things together. Did you want to follow up? Because I'm not sure that I'm responding to it.
No, I think that's great. I think that journalism integrity and the process that you use, if you're just an ordinary person, being fed stories or saying, I'm going to listen to this story, how do we know that that story that's being fed to us or that we're reaching out to look at has that kind of integrity and is representing truth and is not just trying to manipulate us to something that may not be absolutely true and bringing us to one side or another?
Yeah, and I'm not a scholar on it, but I have a gut feeling that we ascribe credibility to certain sources based on a variety of inputs into us. The one thing that legacy media have is that longevity. So we may go to a far right or a far left, mostly far right, because they're much more powerful in the media space. Source for my day-to-day media diet. But if there's a catastrophic event that unfolds, of a major scale, who do we go to? Whom do we ask? And I think we go to legacy media because there's a trust there that might be a little hesitant, but we will go to network television broadcast to get what we think is an accurate reflection of what's happening, especially in hard news events. And you'll find that even with Fox News, when you get beyond the talking part of Fox News, they have legitimate journalists working, on the channel. I do share what I think might be your worry is about, whom do you believe anymore? And I think this is where media literacy and teaching at the youngest age become critical. So we start to discern when something is happening. And do we have the tools to corroborate what we're being told? Whom do we believe? How do influencers gain our trust? And this is just Fred speaking for what it's worth, which is probably not much, but I think it's a sorting out phase that we're in right now. And I'm not sure where that is leading in terms of how future generations will inform themselves, but a lot of it will be, based on technology and tech savvy. And I have some confidence and hope, referring to the previous question, that it will sort itself out. There are some times when people just find their truth, and the Metro surge response, in my mind, was one such instance. Do we have time for any more?
We can probably squeeze one more in if you would like it. Don't want to put you on the spot. Okay.
Hi, I'm Julie Welch, class of 1977, here on campus for planning our 50th reunion. Just serendipitously had a break, and they said, oh, Convocation, and I'm so delighted to hear you talk. I just really admire these stories on the NewsHour. My question, which may be too long an answer, is how do you pick your stories in all of everything that's happening?
How is the sausage made? Because of my longevity, I have a reasonably educated guess as to what's not being covered adequately, what there'll be an appetite for, and under the umbrella of undertold, you can pretty much pick anything, but we try and find niches. I am so privileged to work for an editorial organization that is committed to being thorough. We had a two-part series on USAID ricochets. We followed it last year. We followed it the year before. You want to be as thorough as you can in following up on these stories. That's sort of the broader, 35,000 foot look at it. Are we covering the universe adequately? And then you narrow yourself down and you say, what's the mix? And that becomes an issue. Why are you doing so many stories out of Rwanda instead of the 53 other countries in Africa? or South Africa. Sometimes there's some ridiculous answers. The reason that there's a lot of reporting out of Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Africa is that it's easier to get visas to go into those countries. Does that mean nothing is happening elsewhere? Absolutely not. But it takes a lot more effort to go in and cover some, certain countries. I did a documentary in the Democratic Republic of Congo 20 years ago and carried $32,000 in cash on me because that was a completely cash-based economy, post-war economy. I had to go to the Federal Reserve to get certain newer bills. Am I going to be working more frequently out of Congo? No, it's daunting. It'll take half the year to do it. So you go elsewhere. That's a consideration. And then where does it fit? I mean, is there an aspect or an angle of a story that is not being told, for example? One of the biggest crises in the world today that is not recorded at all because Iran is hogging a lot of the oxygen. And when it's not, other parts of West Asia are. Ukraine gets much less attention. But the real crisis in terms of human toll is happening in Sudan. There's genocidal killing going on in Sudan. I don't have the bandwidth to go in there, although we've reported from it on the NewsHour and colleagues have. I just came back with a story that will be on next week about the refugee crisis caused by this. And we shot it from the Ugandan border with Kenya. So it's a complex set of considerations. And I should not discount the importance of the budget as well. Some of the toughest places to get into are also the most expensive places to get into. So it costs a lot of money to do what I do. And so we've got to pick carefully. But I think the NewsHour does a spectacularly good job of being thorough, or at least committed to the pursuit of the whole truth, as best we know it today.
And on that, we must conclude. Thank you, Fred, so much for being with us today. Thank you all as well.